let's start off with what you made of not just the act of the Reserve Bank of India, but the comments thereof as well. Do you believe they were less hawkish than what the street otherwise anticipated? Because the movement in the yields, the equities, all of them kind of implied that.
Well, look, my sense is that they were pretty much in line with expectations. As in, my sense is that practically everybody was expecting a rate hike close to about 50 basis points. No major change in their stance or any major forecast changes. So I think it was in line with that. But for me, when I sort of read the fine prints, a few things surprised me. I think the one thing that surprised me was the fact that they seem to be very, very positive and optimistic upon GDP growth. In fact, if you look at the finer print, you'll see that for the second half of the year, the current year, they've actually raised their GDP forecast. Remember the global backdrop. People are cutting their forecasts, like meeting after meeting at this point. So it's very interesting that the Reserve Bank of India actually raised its second half of the year forecast. I found that very interesting. The second part, which I found, a little interesting, was their commentary on liquidity. We know that, liquidity has been extremely tight across many sectors. And we also know what's the reason. I think there's twofold. I think the biggest reason is the fact that they've been doing a lot of dollar intervention. They've been selling dollars quite aggressively in the market and draining out rupee liquidity to keep the rupee from depreciating so much. And at the same time, we've had the government sitting on very high cash balances, which actually is very uncharacteristic for this time of the year. So there are a lot of strange things happening in liquidity, but it was a little surprising how the RBI kept saying it's very temporary. So we'll have to see how it sort of goes. For all government has had a conversation with the central bank, and the government has said that don't worry, we are going to start spending in the next couple of months. And I would actually believe that, and you can come back to it if it's interesting. But my sense is that, just calling the whole thing temporary was a little, strange, I would say, given the fact that there's so much tightness in the system.
Pranjul, on the GDP piece, is your assessment about H2 at stark divergence with what the Reserve Bank of India's beliefs have been or have been shown as?
Yes, that's right. We stand at lower growth in the second half of the year compared to the RBI by about 50 basis points. And the reason is that we are seeing two reasons why we think growth will begin to slow. And I suspect after Diwali. I think till Diwali, there's this excitement, retail sales, but then once Diwali is over and then you're like, oh, there's nothing to look forward to. And so many small indicators we are seeing here and there are showing some softness. That's when you sort of sit back and realize that, growth is slowing. Why do I think growth might slow after Diwali? Two reasons. One is export slowdown. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, Neeraj, that our pre-pandemic growth recovery has been led largely by exports growth, especially high-tech exports growth, from mobile phone handsets to IT services to drugs and pharmaceutical products. All of them have really increased GDP growth in India. And now we are finally starting to see some of these slow over the July and August month. We track all the volume indicators very carefully. They have begun to slow. If we are to follow any of the indicators, leading indicators globally that we find, all of them are pointing towards more slowdown coming in the next couple of months. So I think that's one reason. The other reason is this whole excitement about pent-up, high-touch services demand, which played out in the last couple of months. That at some point will fade a little bit. A lot of Indians moved back to rural India, if you remember, in 2020 during the first wave.
Yeah.
Most of them have come back. If you look at urban employment, that's back to pre-pandemic levels. When these workers were moving from rural to urban, every time an Indian moves from rural to urban, on average, his wages goes up 2.5 times. So he demands more things. And that was buoying activity to some extent. But if that adjustment is complete, which data is showing us, then where will that extra growth come from? So we have to brace for some slowdown. It's not just India. Every single country in the world has to brace for some slowdown at this point.